Yeah, Chris Toomey, Chair of Conservation Area Advisory Committee. We have begun the broadcast, so we are now live. So you all have the agenda in front of you, I hope. So first of all, apologies. I think we have apologies from Chris Wardle.
We do.
Anybody else?
No.
Lindsay? Okay, thank you. Late items, there are no late items, to my knowledge. So item 3, declarations of interest.
Yes, I've got two. The Cathedral windows and St Peter's churchyard.
Okay, thank you, Max. In response to that, we've shuffled the agenda around, so you only have to go out once and come back in again. So hopefully that will work out all right.
Thank you, Chris.
Yeah, so just so everyone's clear, we're going to take Corn Lodge first, then the Bonded Warehouse and Engine House. Then Max will allow you to step outside. Then we'll do the Cathedral, then St Peter's Churchyard, and then back on with the main agenda.
Thanks very much.
Clear. Minutes of the previous meeting. Last meeting was 1st of July. Any comments on the minutes of the previous, and are they accepted as a true record of the meeting? Yes, Max? Mr. Connick, thank you. Got that, Lindsay?
Yes,
The next item, item 5, is just a very brief, it's a full agenda today, so I'm not proposing to resolve this today necessarily, but it was just to put this out there for a brief discussion, and that's the point about the name of this committee. So the committee is called the Conservation Area Advisory Committee, but its remit is really wider than that. So this committee discusses all heritage assets and impact on those in the city. So I personally don't think it truly reflects what we do. And secondly, I think it has, there is an acronym associated with it, which I don't think is particularly helpful. So that it was on that basis really that I thought, it might be worth just having a brief discussion about whether there's scope to change that name to better reflect what the committee does. No fixed ideas about that, but it might be that it's just simply the Conservation Advisory Panel, the Heritage Advisory Panel, the Heritage Advisory Committee, or maybe those preceded with the word Derby, and maybe you could drop off the end so it's Derby Heritage Advisory, but things like that have been going through my mind, but as I say, no fixed ideas at all about it. But just wanted initial reaction, and then what I'm going to propose is that we discuss this more fully next time we meet, if there is support for a change, of course, and then we can agree something. So, are there any views on the principle of a name change? Chris, were you going to say something?
I was, but I was just wondering how to turn this on.
Oh, lift up the lid.
Oh, right. Oh, yes. Thank you.
Thank you, Robin. Yes, thank you, Chair. Yes, I did wonder about the word heritage for a little while, and I just wondered perhaps whether that is too broad a term, really. A heritage, can include all sorts of things. The history of language and arts and sort of antiques and such like. And I'm not sure heritage is actually a word that is particularly useful in telling people what we do, which is really work around the conservation of the built environment. I did quickly have a look when you put Conservation Area Advisory Committee into a Google search. You get a whole list of them all around the country, from Camden to wherever. So there is a bit of a brand there. But conservation is perhaps a good word. I think it links to the officer structure. And I think it's good that if this committee has a link to the conservation officer or officers, you know, then that is helpful in many ways. So perhaps we could drop the area, you know, conservation, advisory, whatever, panel, committee, you know, that sort of thing. So I think I'd favour conservation above heritage for those reasons, really. Sure.
Okay, any other views in the room?
I'm with him.
Okay,
Chair,
yeah, thank you.
the word committee is actually wrong because it isn't a committee of the City Council, strictly speaking. Word panel or party or something like that would fit better if we are going to change it. I'm a Conservative and I believe in conservation, therefore I don't believe in change, so I hope I'd vote for no action whatsoever, but there you are.
Okay,
Chair, I think I'm generally in favour of the idea of having something a bit more inclusive. But of course, conservation also could include nature conservation. So that doesn't necessarily cover the sort of buildings aspect. Or indeed, and I feel that we should also be thinking about the public realm, perhaps our parks, and things of that nature. I think what we're thinking about is everything that impinges upon the life of our citizens. So I don't know whether conservation is the right aspect, but certainly, certainly I'd be happy with panel rather than committee.
yeah, okay, please.
It's just reminded me that the Society for the Protection of Rural England used to be called Preservation, and they stopped that because they thought it brought about the idea of preserving an aspect, which is exactly what we're not about as well. So I think some sort of protection word might. But I'm in favour of having a look at it, certainly, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Okay. If there's no other comments, so all we're saying at this stage is that we'll take that forward to next time. We'll if you can make that an agenda item, please, Lindsay, and we'll have a further discussion, and perhaps I'll circulate the briefing note in advance of that with some suggestions. Okay, thank you very much. Moving on. Items determined since the last meeting. I think Chloe's going to give us a quick overview, please.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Yes, just looking at the items determined since the last meeting report, you'll notice that the normal column, which has the notes of what Advisory Committee recommended when it came before you, was missed. So just wanted to quickly go down the list. So the first one was 8 to 14 Agard Street. Advisory Committee did object to that application, and it went to Planning Committee April 2021, and it was approved at Planning Committee subject to Section 106, which I think has subsequently been sorted out because the decision notice was issued in August this year. The next one is Northgate House. There were 2 applications, and Advisory Committee had no objection to those, both of those applications. The next one was at 18 Agard Street. When it came before Conservation Area Advisory Committee, you had no objection. There were comments about the materials, but the recommendation was no objection. The next one was 24 Irongate, a listed building application. So what happened regarding this one is that the listed building application was substantially reined in to just be looking at the ground floor, removal of modern internal partition walls and the installation of new partitions in slightly altered locations. However, the original application that came before you, which included proposals for the upper floors as well, you had no objection to. The next one was 43 Church Lane in Darley Abbey, no objection, and 23 Church Street in Spondon. This one was refused, and advisory committee did object.
Okay, thanks, Chloe. Next item is applications not being considered. I don't propose to go through that, but you've got the list in front of you. So I assume you're content with that. Okay. So moving on to the main part of the agenda then, applications to be considered. As I say, we've shuffled the order, as I explained earlier. But the first one is Corn Lodge, Woodlands Road in Derby. Chloe, please.
So these are two applications, planning application and listed building application, for a number of works at Corn Lodge, which is a grade, well, curtilage listed to Alistry Hall. So here's a photograph of the lodge itself, and I'll quickly run through the proposals. So the proposals include the removal of very small sections of later walls that have been added to the first floor. You can see in red on the screen. This reinstates the original layout. The addition of 4 conservation roof lights to match the existing. 2 are within the main original building and 2 to an extension. So here's elevation showing the 2 additional to the side elevation from the road. And here are 2, obviously the one on to the south elevation is the one that you'd see from the road. The proposal also is to replace the existing 5-bar timber access gate and gate posts with a new electric sliding gate and adjoining pedestrian gate, and that's with we've had it confirmed brick gate piers. There's also, the proposal also includes a new resin-bound gravel to replace loose gravel for the area of vehicle access between Woodlands Lane and the paved driveway. So here you can see the existing and the proposed, and the elevation. Just talk about the sizes of the proposed gate and the visual. Okay, and as you would have seen online, there is a justification for the roof lights in terms of natural light, and there's also justification for the gravel, bonded gravel on the front. So that's it.
Okay, thanks, Chloe. So new roof lights essentially and new boundary gates. So comments, please, from the committee. Chris?
Yeah, just 2 aspects of the proposal that concern me, really. First of all, the gates seem to create a visually impenetrable barrier. I'm not sure really whether that's appropriate. And then the second thing was that there's an introduction of a roof light in the original part of the building, which again, I'm not sure should be being put forward. So those 2 things really just concern me.
Okay. Any other comments?
I agree with Chris, particularly in terms of the impenetrable nature of the gates. Some perforation through there, some intermittent visual transparency would be more appropriate. And I also agree with the comments about the roof light on that front elevation, which will be quite visible and detract a little bit from the original character of the building. The modern section at the back, we all know, is quite a cleverly done piece of building, and it was done in a way that preserved the character of the original gatehouse. I'm also slightly concerned about, in the statement, I think it refers to reconstituted stone for the gate piers, and they appear to be brick on the drawings. Do we have clarification on that, Chloe?
Yes, we have. They're proposed to be brick.
They're going to be brick, yeah,
That's
okay.
what's
And the caps?
Stone. Well,
Natural stone.
Well, I guess reconstituted. It doesn't specifically say.
Okay. They certainly would look more attractive in brick as they've detailed them there.
So that does accord with the visuals that we can see.
Yes. If we can convince them that they ought to have natural stone piers that would weather somewhat better than artificial stone, I think that would be a good move. The detail on the brickwork just below the piers is difficult to determine, but it looks appropriate.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else?
I wonder if I could have clarification on the position. Presumably this lodge was a gatehouse for Allestree Hall at some point. Do we know the position of the original gates that would have been there? Because normally they would sit alongside the gatehouse, so that the person in the lodge would go out and open the gates for visitors. Whereas these proposed gates are going to be set quite a bit further forward towards the road. So I just wonder if there's any evidence of where the original gates would have been.
Are you able to shed any light on that, or has anyone else spotted anything?
Well, obviously, I've the 1901 OS map. I put this on this particular slide just to see if we could find anything just to answer that very point.
Yes, I mean
that does imply exactly what you're saying.
Yes,
Yeah.
so that's
Set
why
much
I've
further
included it.
that's my concern really, because the gates now, if they're put so much further forward, it doesn't relate to the lodge in the historical context. I mean, presumably we don't know what the original gates would look like, but they probably wouldn't have been quite such a high screen as these proposed.
Yeah, it does seem to me it's more about the gates than the lodge now in terms of the view. So it's disappointing that it screens out that key view. Max?
I would just endorse what was said about the gates. I mean, I think the garage seems to have been built on the original drive. So visually, whatever you do, you can't see up a drive, but historically, country house gates were always open work, so you could see. The whole idea was to show off your tree-lined drive or your house in the distance. So in a way, it would be much more appropriate if the applicant were to think of some kind of way of making the gates something you could see through. I mean, ironwork would be the most obvious, and we don't know what the original ones were like, but as they're judging from the date of the lodge, they'd probably have been cast iron, but any sort of open work gate, I think, would be an improvement on just having the whole building blocked off. I mean, they may want privacy, but on the other hand, I think that would be a preferable way of dealing with it.
Okay, thank you. So if I'm reading the room, that's that's an objection subject to the resolution of those matters. Is that fair? So looking at a more open treatment for the gates so that you can get some views, some intervisibility. I think the roof lights, the removal of the more prominent roof lights has been raised. So the hope is that you can discuss with them, Chloe, and negotiate some improvements to that scheme.
Could I just ask, in terms of the roof lights, was it the one that was on the original roof facing the road?
There's one that's very prominent that you can't really see on this.
Serves the bathroom,
This
the
view didn't
ensuite
seem to
chair.
feature on the visual. Yeah, you see from the road, that one.
Yeah, so it's that one rather than the other three.
Yeah, the others I've got no problem with.
Yeah. Okay, I
Thank you.
think that's fair, yeah. Okay, Lindsay, got that?
Yeah.
Thank you. Okay, Chloe, next item on the agenda then is the bonded warehouse. Are we going to do this bonded warehouse first, engine house second? Thanks.
Right, you're all familiar with these two buildings, just off Great Northern Road. Obviously we've got the bonded warehouse and the engine shed, and a plan of where they're located. These applications, there's two of them, and we're going to cover the bonded warehouse first. Although both of them are Grade 2 listed and built about the same time in the late 1870s. Obviously both are in pretty poor condition, and you'll notice that there's a number of condition surveys, structural engineers reports, along with a strategy for their temporary protection. So you'll have noticed when you've had a look at the information online that they're wanting to undertake some protection works to then move on to the next stage of looking at proposals for the buildings. So there's a methodology to remove unstable material, retain, record and establish a scope of repairs. So obviously the process of stabilisation of the structure, they've noted within their document, is designed to ensure the safest possible dismantling method for those involved, so that the unstable structure will be able to cut from above and remove by hand, accessed by a crane basket. The unstable fabric will be supported by a long reach grab machine while cutting takes place. Cut material will be allowed to fall to the lower levels of the building so it can be photographed and recovered for record when the building is deemed safe to access. Secure material storage compound will be set up to safely photograph, record and assess the condition of the removed material. So that's a brief introduction. You'll notice from the drone footage and the satellite view, in terms of the bonded warehouse, the impact that the fire has had, the recent fire has had on the building itself. So obviously there's quite a lot online under this application looking at the structural integrity of the building and how the condition is currently. Plus some proposals of looking at the masonry and repairing the external envelope, because it does say that actually it is quite a robust, the outside walls are quite robust. So I think I've included this one just to show the condition of the roof structure. So the top is imagery from 2019. So there was an area of collapsed roof before the fire, and you can see the areas in red where those areas had already collapsed, and where there was missing roof covering. And then obviously a substantial amount of roof has collapsed post the fire, sadly. So this proposal is to carefully remove the debris and to try and retain as much as possible. But obviously looking at it, that there is going to be a degree of removal. So there's a number of stages that are proposed, and I'll just run through those very briefly. So the stages that you would have seen online are establishing and maintaining a secure perimeter, long reach machine to remove vulnerable roof elements, internal long reach working platform inspection of roof and structure, long reach machine to continue removal of the roof structure where deemed appropriate from inspection at stage 3. Stage 5 involves long reach working platform for detailed inspection of the residual structure, then the implementation of additional external restraint if that's needed at that stage, then stage 7, basement access to confirm the condition of ground floor prior to entry, and then internal ground floor access, removal of debris from the ground floor. So that gives a very brief run through of the proposals for the bonded warehouse.
Okay. Thanks, Chloe. Yeah, so I guess it's good to be talking about some positive intervention on the building. The challenge, of course, will be retaining as much historic fabric as possible. So comments, please.
Chair, I think this move has to be welcomed with open arms. It is clearly, from the information that has been submitted, quite a technical and elaborate operation to try and save elements of the existing roof. And I have no doubt that it will be a little bit of a moving feast. But they seem to have addressed a lot of the issues. What I am slightly concerned about is that in their report they seem to be putting an awful lot of emphasis on input of the conservation officer while these works are going on. With the greatest of respect, Chloe, I think it's beyond your remit, and I think if the City Council would allow it, an engineer from the City Council in support, just as an advisor, to be able to discuss things on a more technical basis with the applicants' engineers would be a really good move. And then, as we all know, sometimes things get removed because it's easier rather than the technicalities that might be involved being expensive to retain. So that's one point. The other point was relating to the external repairs, the repointing work, etc., which again has to be welcomed. I would like or wouldn't like to see that building becoming a patchwork of repairs, such that it gets left and left over time, and somebody turns around and said, well, we've done repairs on it. Those repairs are clearly going to be a temporary measure. I think it would be very useful if we could have some sort of programme from the applicant to say when the rest of the repairs would go forward. I know that's going to be a very difficult question to answer because they'll just turn around and say, well, we haven't got an end user perhaps yet. But I think it would be good to press them to know that we're anxious for that building to be put back in good order. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments?
Yeah, I think I was just taking Paul's point up that it's a pity to be doing all this work and not know what the actual end use of it is, because you could actually carry out perhaps some abortive work, that you probably wouldn't want to do during this process. So, taking
Noted. Carol?
I suppose rather cynically, I'm assuming that they're putting this forward to tide them over, and probably the works are never going to take place. So my concern is timescale, that the council probably couldn't hold them to account to actually begin the work, because we're worrying about the end, what is planned for the end result. But I think that they may never even start it. It's just to tide them over for another 5 years. So that's my main concern.
Okay, any other views? No? Okay, thank you. In summary then, I think there are no objections. In fact, the repairs are to be welcomed, notwithstanding the concerns which are that the structural solutions are sort of fairly, deal with a number of technical matters, and the suggestion has been made that if the City Council could assign an engineer to assist Chloe in making a judgment on the proposals in terms of their staged approach, we think that would be beneficial. The second point was about the general envelope repairs, masonry repairs, and this sort of overarching comment that it would be rather good to know that what's coming next in terms of the end use, except that perhaps isn't known yet, but making sure that we're not talking about any works that may prove to be premature or abortive. So would be better to consider this as part of an overall development plan. And then the final point was just about making sure that the work does get started, so that this building can be saved. So I hope that's a fair summary, Lindsay.
Yeah.
So no objection. Sorry, I should have said Chris Wardle has kindly provided some comments. I'll just do a very quick précis, but he's saying that it's probable these works will entail loss of some fabric, and he's recommending a programme of building recording during the works and suggesting a level 2 record is made and consultation with county archaeology. So thank you. So the next one is the engine shed. Please, Kate.
Yes, moving swiftly onto the engine shed. Once again, a fire destroyed part of the roof of this building, and as you can see from the photographs here, quite a lot internally as well. Interestingly, I'm sure many of you will remember when the tower had its roof structure, and there's a photograph of it, bottom left. So there's quite a lot, once again, structural engineers' reports and condition survey of this building also, with analysis of repairs. In terms of how this differs to the bonded warehouse, they're actually looking at a repair of the roof, a permanent repair of the roof for this building. Once again, there's a number of structures that are gone through. So on this slide, temporary footpath closure and scaffold to perimeter, then assessment of southeast section of the structure, permanent repair to southeastern section, permanent repair to the central section. So just moving through the different parts of the building, and then moving on to permanent repairs of the tower, then looking at internal clearance, then residual clearance and rainwater goods, making sure they work effectively, and then the scaffold is then removed. So that's the process that they're proposing in terms of the clearance, I suppose, and trying to remove as much material as possible that can be salvaged and reused. So that's the stages put forward regarding the engine shed.
Thanks, Chloe. So the difference here is this it's a bit more like a kind of wind and weather type job to make the building safe and secure for a future fit out, I guess. So it's slightly clearer in my view in this case. Comments from anyone on the engine shed?
Chair, again, this is to be welcomed. Yeah, I think it is an attractive building and an historic part of that area of Derby, and I can't wait to see the repairs being put in place.
Okay, any other comments? No? Okay, in summary, no objection, Lindsay, and the proposals are to be welcomed. Comments from Chris Wardle mirror exactly what I read out for the bonded warehouse. So again, to do with level 2 recording and liaison with county archaeology. So we'll move on to the next one. So we're going to go on to the Derby Cathedral. Max, so if I can ask you to step outside momentarily, thank you. I'll try and remember to call you back in again. Okay.
Okay, this is an advert regulation application for the installation of printed fabric images to the lower ground floor windows to the rear of Derby Cathedral, which of course is Grade 1 listed. So the photograph to the bottom right shows the 8 windows where the printed fabric images are proposed. So these images just clarify those lower windows, and these images are proposed to be tied onto the existing window guards, which you can see in the photograph in the bottom left. There's a number of images which are going to be different for each window that is proposed, and so the artwork will be secured using stainless steel cable ties. Within the information you'll have seen that these visual images are to entice visitors into the cathedral. So just running through, just giving an idea of visually what they'll look like. And just to confirm, the width is just over 0.6 of a metre and the height 0.8 of a metre. Sorry, the height is just over 0.6 of a metre and the width just over 0.8 of a metre, just for clarification of the size of those adverts. That's it.
Okay, thanks, Chloe. So this is printed fabric, printed images of the cathedral mounted, I think, on a transparent background, which is then affixed to the existing grills that are on those windows that you're probably familiar with. So, comments, please. Please.
Sorry, Chair, I presume they're easily removable again, so if they are, and if they're not contain any images that are sacrilegious or offensive, then I can't see any objection.
Yeah, that's a fair assumption. They can be taken down as easily as they can be put on there, because they are fixed to the metal grills, not the windows. Any other comments? Carol, please.
I can't see the need for these on such a beautiful piece of architecture, which should entice people in on its own if they wish to go in. And I see this as too fussy.
Thank you.
Chair, I have no great objection to them. It's interesting how they've been aligned with the central transom on the sash window, but not being taken down to the base, which I think would actually probably improve the proportions slightly. But the fact that they're held on with cable ties sort of has a little bit of temporariness to it, as if they can be removed very easily at a future date. So if they entice people into the cathedral and show them what a beautiful building it is inside, I have no real problem with that.
Okay, I mean, it did occur to me that there always seem to be cars parked in front of that, so in terms of actually accessing this and enjoying the images, it's actually not very easy to get up close to it, so I don't know whether they should be encouraged to think about parking elsewhere. I don't think the parked cars help in terms of the setting of that listed building myself, and there are only a handful of them. But that seems to me to sort of undermine their proposal a bit. Any other views at the back there, please?
Yes, I was just going to say, with it being printed fabric, I just wondered whether there was a potential for it to fade over time and then sort of appear scruffy, if you like, and not attractive. And I'd like that to be taken into consideration, really, that, you know, whilst it's new, I don't know whether it's a temporary advertisement or whether it's going to be there permanently. But what I'd hate to see is that in a year's time, they're all faded and detracting from the building. Thank you.
Good, thank you. Chloe?
Yes, within the information, it does say that the artwork is intended to be a temporary installation. However, they haven't applied for a temporary permission under the advert regulations, so whether that's possible or not, I'm not sure. But yes, it says within the information that they are temporary, but obviously they haven't put specifically how long temporary is.
Yeah. Okay, yeah, back to you.
Sorry, perhaps we could add then that we establish what the intended length of the display is to be, and to ensure that they're removed at the end of that, so that, I mean, we all know what, you know, old advertisements look like, look very tired. So to make that point, thank you.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Okay, so if there are no other comments, if I'm reading this, there's no objection. Oh, there's one. We better take a vote in that case. Objections? Okay, no objection. Okay, looks like the consensus is in favour of no objection. But please note, Chloe, the points that have been made in terms of fussiness. This point that we don't want something that's going to fade and degrade over time. So some clarity over the temporariness of them. And the point too about the parked cars, whether that, I mean, it's obviously not the intent as it stands, but it's worth considering. So that's the summary, Lindsay. Okay with that? Thank you. Okay, so moving on. Land at St Peter's Churchyard. Oh, if you could take us through this one, please.
Yes, certainly. Two applications. One's a full planning application for the use of land as an outdoor food, drink, artisan traders venue, including erection of kiosk buildings and entrance gates. And the second listed building application for partial demolition of the stone boundary wall, which is classed as curtilage of St Peter's Church itself. There's a little bit of history as regarding this area of land. As you probably remember, there have been a number of applications for residential development on this area of land adjacent to St Peter's Church over the last few years, which have been refused, and there's one appeal planning appeal that has been dismissed. So here's the area. Obviously there's a number of listed buildings nearby. Obviously the church being just one of them, but there's also the county court house opposite, and also the building immediately adjacent. And there we go, just giving a bit more closer photographs of those elements, and also the boundary wall. So here's the previously refused application, which I'm sure you'll remember, where the appeal was dismissed. And the appeal decision, the inspector did talk about the importance of this piece of land in terms of the setting of the nearby listed buildings, as well as, obviously I've talked about St Peter's Church, but also the old grammar school, which are both grade 2 star, and the grade 2 called County Court opposite. So there was also a lot within the appeal statement regarding the importance of this area within the conservation area. So moving on to what's being proposed is a number of kiosks within this area, as well as you can see, a 4-metre breach of the wall, the existing stone boundary wall, to create an access, along with an accessible platform lift to one side. So as well as the kiosks, there's also WC and a site office to the rear of the site, as you can see on the plan. As you'll have seen on site, online, the site has got quite a varying land levels, and the stone wall is retaining. So here's a close-up of the access proposed through the wall. And the elevation showing the proposed breach of the wall, the addition of 2 piers, a wrought iron railings to be installed to the wall itself in black, and the arched wrought iron gantry above. The kiosks themselves are proposed to be constructed as temporary structures. The walls are in horizontally planked tongue-groove UPVC cladding in grey, with oak effect corner stanchions and trims. They're proposed to be no dig or very shallow dig, and have a kicker course in engineering bricks. So here's some elevations and details of the proposals. That's it.
Okay, Chloe, before I forget, Chris Wardle's made a few comments. He's concerned about the disturbance of potential burial site, and then goes on to say, if, however, approved, there would need to be a programme of archaeological fieldwork in order to determine whether or not medieval burials lie within the affected area. So there's quite a bit about that. But so in summary, this is making a new opening in the existing stone boundary wall, adding some railings on top, adding some gates, steps and access lift, and then the provision of these new kiosks in a cluster under the trees. So comments, please. Ian.
Chris, Chair. I've got no problem in principle with this scheme, but I just feel it's not very imaginative. It's not the sort of thing you'd see in a courtyard in France or Austria, somewhere like that. I was hoping for something where perhaps the courtyard was opened up where kiosks 12, 13 and 14 are, so that it was more open in in the middle, so that you could have some seating, perhaps covered seating, so that if it rained there was somewhere to sit. Perhaps with a freestanding fabric structure to cover it, a temporary structure obviously, because it's an important archaeological site. But just something to lighten it up. I mean, the kiosk design as well, it's very heavy, and it's not the sort of thing you'd normally see in a courtyard design like this in Europe, really.
They look like standard
They look
timber
like
sheds.
just somebody from Derby Shed Company's done a design on it, you know.
Okay, thank you.
So yeah, that was the main thing.
Okay, any other comments? Clara, please.
I agree with Ian that the central three kiosks would be better without them to make it more open. But in effect, it's a good use of the site because at the moment, having read in the paper, terrible time with people climbing over the gates at the moment to drug take or whatever. And I think it would be a brilliant use of the site. But some of the notes that Max has left with regarding to the history was that some of the burial ground has been subsumed by the St. Peter's House in the 1970s. So there probably will be certain graves there, but probably you'd need to have that researched. But in effect, I think the scheme's quite a good one.
Okay.
Chair, I know this piece of ground pretty well. I've known it all my life. My father had his office opposite, and indeed, after he died, I took over the office. And so I have known it since the 1950s, and we used to use in fact, it was pretty much a public area before the office block was built, and we used to go over there to have our lunch or just laze in the sunshine or whatever under the trees. I do recollect some grave slabs, but I don't think there were any actually in situ at the time. I think they were sort of propped up against a wall, if I remember correctly. As for the current application, this is just about the only piece of open ground in this part of the city, and it certainly needs to be preserved. And if this is a way of preserving it, then that it is to be welcomed, particularly if it leads to it being sort of tidied up, because it's horribly neglected at the moment, and something certainly needs to be done with it. As to the application in detail, I must say I don't like the design of the kiosks. I'm sure they could be much better than that. And did you say they were going to be made of UPVC or something? I mean, surely at least timber should be a preferable material for something of this nature.
Timber, I think. Oh, okay, sorry. Okay.
So, and obviously unfortunately, it means the demolition of a bit of the wall in order to get access to the site. But there is a precedent in the sense that when the office block was built, I think it used to have a small entrance where that pier is, and then they just widened it and put a damn great drive right through the graveyard, or if it was a graveyard. So there is unfortunate precedent there. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Comments from Robin?
There's a perfect example of how to do kiosks on the marketplace, and they're timber and very flexible. My concern though is, as far as I can see, the only entrance is, the pedestrian entrance is via steps, quite unnecessary steps. There's plenty of room there to put a ramp. Is there a separate wheelchair entrance, or
There's a little platform lift immediately adjacent to the steps. for wheelchairs?
Well, I would have thought a ramp
Am I reading that
taking
right?
up a bit more space would be vastly preferable and could be a much nicer design than, I mean, you don't expect to see steps put in nowadays like that.
Yeah, they may, I mean, I don't want to speak for them, but they may have been concerned about the excavation to form the ramp, perhaps, and further intrusion.
All
on
right,
the archaeology,
it's
I don't
not
know.
really a conservation matter, but I do think it needs a bit more looking at.
Yeah, okay. Paul?
Yeah, there are positives and negatives with this application. I agree with what David said about the use of that space. Is if it could be brought back into public use, then all well and good. The puncturing of the wall, again, that is counterbalanced by the railings that were taken away during the last war, presumably. But as Robin said, the inclusion of a ramp in there might be a solution, because if the opening was made slightly narrower, rather than a set of steps and set to one end or the other to keep the integrity of most of the wall, I think it would probably be a slightly better solution. But the quality of the design in the kiosks and the landscaping there really needs to be top-notch. Otherwise, it's going to become second-rate, which is what we don't want to encourage in Derby city centre. You're absolutely right. That space is one of the few open spaces left within the city. And it also forms a beautiful backdrop to St Peter's and to the old grammar school, and indeed the Wesleyan chapel next door. So it does need some careful detail, even though it seems we don't object to the principle of it. Thank you, Chair.
Okay. Any further views? I mean, I would certainly agree in terms of the design of the kiosks. I think I'm not convinced it is making a positive contribution to the setting of the heritage assets, and I think there is a standing objection from Historic England as I understand it. But so I think in terms of the view in the room, it sounds like there's no objection. Is that fair? Subject to detailed design matters being discussed. Chloe? And these should be focused on the design of the kiosks themselves, which are, I think, underwhelming.
Chair, and the landscaping
And the
around,
landscape
because
too, and the...
you have the trees
guess-
there, which if damage occurs to the roots of those trees, then we lose perhaps the only group of trees within the centre of Derby, saving Frygate and London Road.
Yeah, and I guess it's not been said overtly, but it's this the notion of removing the central kiosks and creating, I suppose, a stronger sense of place is what's being said, I think. So that if it's going to happen, it needs to have a sense of place and identity, and certainly the filling it up with kiosks isn't really helping with that. So if it had a central kind of court, that would help. I think is a fair reflection of what's been said. And the steps are seen as somewhat intrusive, and notwithstanding that there is a platform lift proposed, I think the sense that a ramp would give a greater sense of accessibility, as well as allowing access for all, of course. So there's quite a few issues to raise, but that's all couched within, I think, in the room, no objection. Okay, thank you.
Max.
Oh, sorry, yeah, please do, yeah. I knew I'd forget, you see. Thanks, Lindsay. welcome back, Max. We're moving on to item 5, which is the hubs. There's a lot of them, but essentially once you get your head around what's proposed, it's the same thing in various locations, I think is a fair summary. So Chloe, I'll let you talk us through that, please.
Okay, these are a number of applications for full planning application for the hub, so the digital kiosk as shown on the slide, as well as an accompanying advert consent application for the 2 internally illuminated digital display screens, which are obviously either side of the kiosk. So, yes, there are a number of applications which I'm going to run through very quickly. Just to remind you, in 2019 there was a number of these proposed, and you may remember these were telephone kiosks with internally illuminated digital display screen on one side. It did go to an appeal, and I'll just run through briefly what happened regarding that. It was slightly different with these because the kiosk structures were dismissed as those trying to install them were arguing that it didn't need planning permission. Under the Telecommunications Code System Operators schedule as part of the Town and Country Planning General GPDO 2015. So they obviously needed planning permission. But there was also a refusal to grant express consent for adverts under the advert regulation applications which accompanied each one. So the appeal statement focused on the inappropriate nature of the adverts in terms of amenity and the large and dominant feature which looked to be very prominent within the street scene in their view. The effect would detract from its character and appearance of the area and of the wider conservation area, and in some cases the appeal statement did specifically mention the negative impact on listed buildings and locally listed buildings. There was one within the number of appeals, of which there were a number. There was just one that was allowed, which was for the display of a single illuminated display and hub, because it was some way away from a conservation area, listed building, etc. So I just wanted to remind you about those applications and that appeal that was dismissed in 2019. There are slight differences, obviously, as you can see, in terms of the design and also the size, because the previous height proposed was 2.6 metres tall, just over 1.3 metres wide, and 31 centimetres deep. The one that's the design of those put forward at the moment are just over 2.9 metres, a width just over 1.2 metres, and a depth of 35 centimetres. I mean, obviously, there's a lot of information online regarding the street hubs, which are phone box replacements that bring a host of free services to communities, including ultra-fast Wi-Fi, fast device charging using 2 USB ports, emergency services button, council services via touchscreen tablet, free UK national landline mobile phone calls, etc., as well as the 2 screens. So, just moving on to what's proposed where. There's one proposed, the land at Corn Market, adjacent to the Cosy Club. You can see the existing phone box where it's sited at the moment, and the proposed hub just underneath, or partially underneath, adjacent to the canopy. So obviously there's a number of listed buildings, the former which are all grade 2, obviously within the city centre conservation area. NatWest Bank, 19 Corn Market, former Royal Buildings 3 to 8, Victoria Street, and on the opposite side 1 to 2 Albert Street. So as you can see, that's the proposed location of that one. Next one is outside the court, Derby Court on the Moorledge. You can see the existing phone box and the proposed hub in location. You'll notice in terms of this one, it is outside the conservation area and away from listed buildings, although you can see the locally listed building, Courthouse Public House on the Moorledge. Next one is the land at Victoria Street, adjacent to the Green Lane Junction. In the photograph you can see the existing phone box and the proposed location on the Victoria Street pavement, as you can see in the photograph. This location is just outside the city centre conservation area and outside Green Lane and St Peter's conservation area. And obviously there's the two grade 2 listed buildings, 5 and 7 Green Lane, and obviously Royal Buildings opposite. Next one, Land at Corn Market, adjacent to Primark. You'll see the existing phone boxes and the proposed hub, obviously slightly taller than the existing phone boxes, and obviously there's a key view to the cathedral in this location. Although not shown on the visual, those 4 telephone boxes proposed to be removed and the hub in its location. Obviously the listed buildings are the same as the previous one I've just mentioned. Marketplace, obviously there are currently 2 phone boxes, and there's a proposed hub in this particular location. Obviously there's a number of listed buildings nearby, which include 35 to 36 Marketplace, the Guildhall, 33 Marketplace, the War Memorial, 2 to 4 Marketplace, former NatWest Bank, 11 Marketplace, and they're all grade 2. So this shows the existing telephone call boxes removed and the street hub where proposed. And the last one is proposed at Land of St Peter's Street, and that's to replace an existing one that did obtain permission previously. So it's going from a kiosk to a hub. And as you can see, it is just outside the conservation area, and there are a number of listed buildings a little way away. So the Green Man Inn, 2-star behind the frontage onto the bank frontage, onto St Peter's Street, and obviously St Peter's Church, and 45 St Peter's Street, which is grade 2.
Okay, thanks, Chloe. There's a few there to get through. So yeah, these are called street hubs, but essentially they're opportunities for free Wi-Fi, free telephone calls, charging for mobile phones, emergency calls, but essentially advertising hoardings on both sides, and they're 3 metres in height, and the scheme proposes the removal of lots of street clutter associated with them, but I'm not sure the images actually show that or promise that. So comments please on the street hubs. Robin.
I hate them. I think we shouldn't have any in any conservation area. If somebody wanted to put up an advertising hoarding, which is essentially what these are, we would say no. I mean, I particularly object to the one near the War Memorial. I think that's obnoxious. Quite honestly, everybody, bar none, has at least one mobile phone now. You don't need to charge them during the day, and they're going to very soon last an awful lot longer than they do at the moment on charge. I really cannot see that we need these or there's any necessity for them. The only people that use phone boxes are either drug dealers or prostitutes, and I think we ought to make a firm policy that we do not allow these in conservation areas. Sorry, that's a bit strong, but I don't like them at all.
Okay. Any other comments? Max?
I would agree with every word Robin said. I think at 3 metres they're obscenely large, and being black they're very visible. They essentially are a vehicle for British Telecom to get advertising rent, and they affect the setting of listed buildings in almost every case where they're in a conservation area. The two outside the conservation area I'm less worried about, but I think as a principle, like as Robin says, we should outlaw the things. They're just clutter.
Okay, thank you. Ian?
Chair, just a couple of comments. I agree with everything Robin said about them, but the only thing that would change my mind is if there was a defibrillator in each one, so that we'd have a fantastic set of defibrillators in Derby instead of our advertising hoarding. Is there any chance that we get any revenue for the City Council from putting them on? Presumably there's no payment to the City Council, although there are advertising hoardings, you know. Where's the money going to?
Okay, noted. I guess that's outside our remit. There's a committee, but thank you.
But defibrillators can be attached to buildings.
Yeah, indeed.
Yeah,
They don't need to be independently serviced. They need an electrical feed from that building anyway. Yes, we could do with more, I agree, but I don't think these are...
That was my only point.
In fact, it's not on the application, is it, to make them defibrillators?
It's not part of the machine that they've got there. It's,
Thank you, Chair. I'm sorry to take a different view to it, but they don't bother me at all. What I am concerned about, and it was in Robin's last point, there will be disruption because these things require power, and I'm slightly concerned about the amount of digging that the trenches will require to stop in power, and whether it will be all reinstated properly. That's my only view.
Okay. Since you expressed that view, we'd best take a vote. So we better take a vote, because you're suggesting no objection. So those objecting to this? No objection. Okay. That's a majority in favour of objection. On the grounds that these will adversely affect the character and appearance of conservation area and setting of listed buildings.
Chair, can I just ask a question? Has there been any consultation with the city realm or the engineers within the city on the positioning of these units? I mean, apart from the fact they are ridiculously out of scale, I just wonder whether there's been any consultation prior to it coming to this committee.
Chloe, are you able to illuminate us?
Obviously, a number of people have been consulted on the applications. That includes, obviously, highways, development control highways, and their comments can be seen online. And it has been mentioned to those undertaking public realm improvements under the Transforming Cities Fund, so they are aware.
Okay, thank you. I think that takes us on to the final item. Beckett Well. Chloe, thanks.
Okay, this is a full planning application regarding Beckett Well, of which you're all aware. This proposal is for the demolition of unretained buildings and structures, renovation and alterations to retained building, direction of a performance and entertainment venue, service yard, vehicular and pedestrian access, highway infrastructure amendments, landscaping, public realm and associated works. So on the screen you can see, and you're all aware of the Beckett Well development and the number of phases of proposals. This one is relating to the Beckett Well, proposed Beckett Well Arena, as labelled top right. In terms of the location, this in effect replaces Lorry House on this plan, and you can also see the buildings that are affected, which is 6 Beckett Street, Padley House, and there's a building to the rear of this one that fronts Beckett Street. So, just looking at heritage assets near to the site, as well as those on the site. Nearby, obviously we've got 2 listed buildings which are in the conservation area. You can see the conservation area boundary. So here's a photographs of those 2 Grade 2 listed buildings which are either side of Beckett Street. The bottom left photograph shows the view, showing those 2 listed buildings either side, and a view of the site, which you can see the building which is going to proposed to be removed is this building here, along with this one behind it. So here's a close-up of the buildings which are proposed to be removed. Obviously, there's 6 Beckett Street, which is shown in the top right photograph, to the left-hand side of that. And there's also Padley House, which you can see behind. Just an aerial photograph showing, obviously, where the Hippodrome Theatre is, Victoria Street, running on here, Beckett Well, Beckett Street, and the buildings proposed to be demolished, just to get your bearings, as well as those listed buildings and the edge of the conservation area. Obviously there is a heritage statement talking about the evolution of these buildings, and some historic photographs, as you can see. The heritage statement suggests that what was once the Methodist chapel was demolished, but its frontage retained, obviously with its portico going and some roof works. As you can see, that's not now upon the building. And there are also some buildings to the rear. That's photographs of these buildings here that are proposed to be demolished. And as you can see, they're of modern construction and block work inside. So the photograph to the right shows the building on the left-hand side of that top left photo. This building is actually proposed to be retained to the rear of the Wilkins Centre. So that's a very quick summary. Obviously you will have seen within the application information there's a lot more information regarding the For the Methodist Chapel, and that it's thought to have been completely rebuilt apart from its frontage in 1947. And obviously the photographs show that the building in the foreground, this one can be seen on the historic photograph, as you can see bottom left, but obviously there's been quite a lot of change behind that. Moving on to proposals, the proposals for the performance venue, the area to Beckett Street is proposed to be very much a back of house, tour bus, parking area, artist entrance and HGV dock area with railings along the front and a 13-metre wide sliding gate for HGV access. Obviously you can see the layout of the venue and the corner which will lead on to the square and the rest of Beckett Well. So here once again is the ground and first floor layouts. Then there's the second, third and fourth floor. So these go through, and I'm sure you've seen all the information online in terms of the different spaces and the proposals for each. In terms of the external elevations, so the east elevation to Collier Street is shown to the upper part of the slide, and the Beckett Well entrance is shown to the bottom of the slide. And then we've got the other elevations, obviously the top part in terms of Beckett Street on the right and the sort of inner part of the site on the left. You'll have noticed when you've looked at this online, you can see the faint outline, dotted red, of the previous scale and massings of the previous buildings that were on this site. They've also done a bit of analysis of looking at the skyline and views. So looking at the view for Uttoxeter New Road, and you might be able to see a little bit of part of the performance venue in that location where I'm pointing to on the screen. And then Beckett Street, obviously the view along Beckett Street to those two listed buildings which I've mentioned. Obviously views of the Cathedral and the museum and art gallery at the end of the street, and obviously Jacobean House also on the corner, and the railings and the performance venue on the right hand side. And here are some general existing and proposed views looking from Victoria Street across to the venue, as you can see it proposed in that area of the public square, and also to the bottom of the bottom two photographs also show visual images showing the elevation into the square. Once again, visuals of different elevations from different vantage points, and then in terms of the materials, which was a series of black, dark grey and metallic silver, and these are sort of coating to steel, aluminium, metalwork, and then black smooth face brick, some fair face block work. As you notice, there's a number of elements which are glazed, feature cladding, and perforated powder coated metal in black for the totem feature on the building, and the flat roofs obviously for plant access, and there's some elements of single ply membrane. So that's a quick summary of those materials. Is there anything else that you'd like to add, Laura?
Laura, do you want to add anything? Thank you very much. Okay, Chloe? Okay, so thank you very much. So this is the performance venue at Beckett Well, which involves demolition of some buildings and then forms the edge of the proposed square, albeit the site which is most prominent on the square is yet to be developed. So comments, please.
Quite apart from the fact that I think that it's a hideous building and is in strict competition with the derelict hotel beside it, which I agree is coming down. My chief concern is the removal of the former Baptist chapel. The heritage statement was exceedingly mendacious about its history. It is more or less intact. The only thing was they removed the pediment and divided the interior. Otherwise, it's a perfectly good mid-19th century chapel, which I think a great effort should be made to retain a building of that significance, although it is unlisted. I'm not sure whether the proposal includes the demolition of the Wilkins Memorial Hall. Is that, which is beside it on the west side?
The modern building...
On the right, on that bottom
look at the
picture.
photograph on the right, no.
That's excluded, is it?
That's excluded apart from the buildings.
Behind
I'll
it.
show you the photograph behind it.
Yes, I'm not sure what sort of use the Wilkinson Memorial Hall will have if there's going to be something disturbance behind it, but of course that's where the Derby Little Theatre began, and it has significant resonance in the history of the theatre in Derby. But my chief concern is that the I think completely unnecessary removal of that chapel, which is eminently adaptable to a number of different uses, and that would be my chief objection.
Okay, thank you. Other comments?
Chair, as Max pointed out, the chapel exists and it actually forms a good end stop to Newland Street. And the quality of the architecture of the new building fronting onto Beckett Street is, I have to say, quite poor. It is the back end of the building, and I'm afraid the quality of the architecture reflects that, but it doesn't respect the listed buildings that sit opposite and at the side of it. And I think there needs to be some reconsideration of that and better articulation, and possibly even more sympathetic materials to that street scene.
It did occur to me that it does present a service yard effectively to Beckett Street.
An objection to this on the basis that it's the wrong building in the wrong place. We have campaigned for years to get Duckworth Square built upon, and with the new square being built next to Victoria Street, the Duckworth Square site would be the ideal location for the new theatre venue. A really good quality building there in a prominent position would be a credit to the city. I'm afraid this application is a poor quality building, and if Duckworth Square itself ever gets developed, which is another uncertainty, it's going to be just stuffed down a side street, just like the old Pink Coconut and the entertainment venues that were there before, a rather shady area, if you remember. So we're extremely disappointed. We want to see an entertainment venue of this nature erected, but it's the wrong building, the wrong place, I'm afraid.
Okay.
Chris,
Any
yeah,
other
I'd like
comments?
to reiterate what David said. And part of the objection that the Civic Society have is that we did a similar development plan where we showed the performance venue on the Duckworth Square site next to the Hippodrome, which we believe should be reopened. And so there'll be the connectivity between this new performance venue and the Hippodrome. And to be constructive, we believe this site should be a residential site. As Paul said, that there are buildings on that elevation towards Newland Street that would look in keeping with a nice residential development that would sort of break the scale of buildings from the Beckett Lane site down towards the residential areas that adjoin Macklin Street and Beckett.
Okay. Anyone else? There's a strong sense of objection. So unless anyone says otherwise, I ought to say, have some comments from Chris. His final one, again, he's suggesting that the applicant consult county archaeology in terms of field work. And if the demolition of the Methodist chapel is approved, he suggests a level 2 record is made before demolition. So I think from the panel, the committee's point of view, Lindsay, it's an objection on the grounds that the removal of the former Baptist chapel is an issue, notwithstanding its unlisted status, but the contribution it makes generally. There's some concerns about, strongly held concerns about the quality of the architecture and design. And there's a strong view that whilst the performance venue per se is welcomed for the city, this appears to be the wrong building in the wrong location, in as much as it's pretty much hidden away, has no prominence for what could be a cultural building, and really serves to sterilise Beckett Street by presenting a pretty unwelcoming blank facade that's effectively a service yard. So I think for those reasons, impact on heritage assets, setting of listed buildings in the vicinity, it's an objection. So that concludes the applications. Lindsay, trust you got that summary okay? Yeah. Thank you. There's just one more thing that I wanted to say before closing the meeting, and that's to do with the, I'm aware that the city has very sensibly advertised for a conservation officer post, so Chloe hopefully will get some support sometime soon. So I believe I think it's a full-time post as well, and the advertisements are out and the closing date's imminent, 12th of September. So I think the city's minded to make the appointment fairly swiftly. So all good news. So I wanted you to be aware of that if you weren't already. So that's all to the good. So unless there's anything else, any burning issues, I'll close the meeting and we'll end the recording. Please, Lindsay.